Okay, so at this point, hopefully you know that we are in need of a leadership revolution. And we start breaking down what is a leader exactly. And it's hard to define, but it's easy to define. Because let's look at it, what a leader is exactly. Is it a position? We talked about this. It's not a position. It's not a title, and it's not just that you have authority or somewhere in the hierarchy you're over other people and that makes you a leader. Well, there's this thing that I've seen many years in leadership where they go, well, are you a leader or you are a manager? And they almost make the manager look like it's a negative role while the leader is the real role. Well, I'm telling you, from running my own businesses, from leading really successful teams, and having a great track record in some of the companies that I've worked with, you are most likely going to be in a role that you'll have to play leader and manager. We don't all have the liberty to say, hey, I'm the leader, you're the manager, and then we have supervisors, we have team leads, and look, we don't always have that clear distinction. I've played the leader role and the manager role, but here's what I want to say. I'm not going to in any way be negative about a manager. As a matter of fact, effective leaders need good management. But I think the difference is managers manage processes. They oversee operations. They oversee policies. And they make sure, now they do have to have good communication skills, and they do have to have good team building skills, and they really have to refine those skills. But I think there is a difference between the leader and the manager. But I don't in any way want to negate the effectiveness of having that good manager. But for this training, what we're going to do is really focus on that role, if you're in both roles, as what does a leader need to do, and then we'll focus maybe on another time, and there's tons of great training out there on management. That's what I think most of the leadership training out there is really about. It's how to be a better manager. It's all good, and I think you should attend and listen and read as many books as possible on how to be an effective manager. But I think what we're really missing is, how do I also be an effective leader and look at that as a different role? What is a leader? Is a leader the boss? Well, I've kind of talked about this already, right? That the boss really is, to me, a negative word. If you see that picture, or if you're looking at the video of this, a boss is someone who bosses people around. Well, go do this, go over there and do that. And that is definitely not a leader. Is a leader a supervisor? Well, it could be. You could be in a supervisor position. I think that goes hand in hand with a manager, and I think there are really distinct manager-supervisor things that they need to learn. But a leader might also be a coach, right? There are great examples in sports of a leader, of a Vince Lombardi or a Phil Jackson, of somebody who had to lead, but also had to be in the role of a coach. And to me, what I see as a leader leads teams, leads an organization, leads a company, right? Leads a nonprofit. But they also might have to be in the point of a coach where they work more on a one-on-one level with their individual team members. Again, if you have the ability to say, hey, I'm in this position as a leader and I have people who are in the coach role, that's great. For most people, in corporate America at least, they don't have that liberty to say, hey, go speak to the coach. You are the coach, you are the leader, you are the supervisor, you are the boss, you are the manager. So we just need to look at, okay, when it comes to terms of a leader, what does a leader do? Another thing a leader does, an effective leader, and this really comes down to the Proverbs 2717 principle here of iron sharpening iron. It's you also might be in a mentor role. If you think for one moment that you have this grand vision and you are going to be out there leading the team always, and it's always going to be you out there in the front lines leading with the whole army behind you, well, I'm telling you, you're not going to reach that vision that you might have. If it's a compelling vision or it's a big vision, you as a leader need to mentor people. Personally mentor them, right? It's almost like a coach could be considered a personal trainer, but a mentor might be somebody who teaches somebody else to be a personal trainer, if I could use that example. Does that make sense? Right? And like I said, look, we talk about leadership. I've never heard somebody say, well, leadership isn't important. I think every person in some type, one of those roles, believes leadership is important, but we've come to the point, if you've seen the Dilbert commercials, or the Dilbert, not commercials, but the Dilbert cartoons, I mean, they're funny, but leadership has almost become this cliche thing. You know, you see, what we need is more leadership, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we don't have a strategy, but we're going to talk about it. Leadership, smeadership. No, we need to have leadership defined. And what does a leader do? What does a leader doesn't do? What are some effective things we could look at? What are some models that we can follow? And get past just this general philosophy of leadership. So one more, let's break down the difference between a leader and a manager. Both are important. And we're really going to get into what leaders do. But managers, for me, in my history of working with corporate America, managers oversee processes. Is that important? Absolutely, it's important. We don't want to discount that at any point. If you don't have processes in place, maybe through leadership, through consulting, through getting a coach, through working with your managers, you start to come up with those processes, but a manager is going to oversee those processes. A manager is going to make sure procedures are being executed. A manager is going to interview and hire a lot of times. It might not always be the person in that designated leadership role who does the actual interviewing and hiring. It could start at your AR or HR team, right? They counsel and terminate their associates. Leaders do that too, and if you're playing both roles, you're saying, well, I'm still kind of confused here. Well, let's just kind of break it down a little bit more. They supervise their employees, their team members. They review and handle paperwork. Somebody's got to do it. Now, as you become more into that leadership role, that's where the concept of delegation is going to come into play, where you're starting to delegate some of that paperwork and things that have to be processed every day to someone who enjoys that and wants to do that role, so you could continue to focus on the leadership, right? They stick to a budget, something that leaders do and managers do as well. But a lot of times managers are given a certain, I remember in one company I worked for, I was given an employee hour budget of how many hours that I had to budget between my team of working hours that could be paid out. However, I wanted to arrange that with creating the schedule that worked the best with when we were the busiest and when there were things that needed to be done. That was my job as a manager. They have daily communication with their team members and their employees. And they have team meetings. I mean, you might be thinking, well, I'm a manager, I don't do half of this stuff. Well, like I said, you have to find ways to improve your management techniques. You have to improve your management skills. But then you also have to look at, okay, if I am playing both of these roles, let's not forget about being an effective leader. So what are some common traits of uncommon leaders? Now, I gave you some examples before of some great leaders in history. You might think of Martin Luther King Jr. What are some of the common traits that Martin Luther King Jr. had with other leaders? And then you have Winston Churchill, you have Gandhi, you have John F. Kennedy. You have George Washington, still revered as one of our most effective leaders our country has ever had. Steve Jobs, who's no longer with us, but he had, if you read anything about Steve Jobs and if you read anything about his personality, he wasn't always the most pleasant person to get along with, but he did lead that company, Apple, to a point that is just unmatched in history. And then you have Jack Welch of GE, Ronald Reagan, and then I have an example here of someone might say, well, why do you have a picture of Hitler? Is he an uncommon leader? Yes. He wasn't a good leader. He didn't have good morals. He was an evil, evil person. But how was he able to lead a country, a whole part of a country, into this major craziness that they did? There were some common leadership traits along with the other good examples. So let's break this down. What do effective leaders do without all the BS? And when I say the BS, I want you to understand I'm talking about the bogus stuff. The stuff that is just surface level, the stuff that you think that just comes to mind without really examining what a great leader is. Let's break that down.